In Catan, some games are decided by luck, some by placement strategy, but all of them are decided by tactics. A tactic is a key action within your game that enables your strategy to succeed. Some tactics are good, some are bad, and some are straight up diabolical. Today we're taking a look at 7 tactics everyone should know if you want to win a game of Catan. Catan is an economic game, and to win it you need to reach 10 victory points. To do this you need a lot of cards. The average winner of a Catan game produces 61 resources through dice rolls, while those who didn't win produced 52 resources on average. But let's focus on the 61 instead. With your initial starting settlement placements, you produce 20 resources per 36 dice rolls on average. And an average game of Catan lasts 70 turns, so your starting settlements give you 39 resources on average. It means you need to find a way to make up the other 22 resources before your opponents do. Enter the EVC. EVC stands for Economic Value Calculator, and it's a tool to calculate how many resources you will likely produce with your settlements and cities. It works as follows. Every number on a Catan board has a chance of being rolled, but not all numbers are equal. Per 36 dice rolls, an 8 rolls 5 times on average, while a 10 rolls 3 times. These rolls per 36 are also called production pips. So if you take a spot like this 8, 5, 10, it's likely to produce 12 cards in the next 36 dice rolls. And over a 70 turn game, it will be 23 cards, which is 6 cards more than a 9 for 11 for example. I've studied a lot of strategy games, and with many of them it's crucial to build your economy first and go for the win later. And Catan is no exception. The key is to look for investments that will give you economic return, like strong settlements and cities. Let's say you upgrade your settlement on the 8, 5, 10 to a city. The cost of building a city is 3 ore and 2 wheat, so that's 5 resources. And let's also say you did this on the 20th turn of the game. So with an average game of Catan lasting 70 turns, it would mean there would be 50 turns left in the game. Because a city produces double the resources of a settlement, you compare 12 pips to 24 pips. So it means you'd produce 16.7 additional resources for the rest of the game. Minus the 5 resources the city cost, you'll have a return on investment of 11.7. But that's not all you can calculate with the EVC. You can also calculate the value of trades. An orbit is one round in which all players have one turn. So in a 4-player game, an orbit means 4 consecutive turns. Now let's imagine you want to build an expansion settlement on an open 9 for 11 spot. The thing is, you don't have the required brick. So you try to make a trade. You offer a couple of 1-for-1 deals but no takers. But someone makes a counter offer. If you pay 2 cards of your choice, you get a brick. But should you take this deal? A 1-for-1 deal seems more fair, but what's often forgotten is that you get immediate value, whereas your opponent has to wait a few turns before they can get the value from the trade on the board. So let's say it's quite late in the game already. We estimate 20 turns left to play. A 9 for 11 equals 8 pips. Therefore, in the EVC, we select the I column and the 52nd row. We see a score of 4.4, which means the 9 for 11 is going to produce around 4 or 5 resources for the remainder of the game. If we look 1 orbit later, so we drop 4 cells in the EVC, we see a score of 3.6. So that means that building a settlement on the 9 for 11 1 orbit earlier results close to a value of 0.8 resource this late in the game. Therefore, it can certainly be worth it to pay an extra card to be able to build a certain settlement or city 1 orbit earlier than you otherwise would have. Let's move on to tactic number 2. Bank trades. During the early stages of the game, in which you may have settled on an 8-5-10 and a 6-11-12, it can be incredibly expensive to do a 4-for-1 trade, even up to the point it automatically loses you the game. That sounds absurd, but let me explain. The 8-5-10 equals 12 production pips, and the 6-11-12 adds 8 pips on top of that, totaling 20 pips. Now, per 36 dice rolls, that would be 20 cards. But if you divide by 9, you know the value per 4 dice rolls, which equals an orbit. So let's make it more practical. On most orbits, your starting settlements produce 2 resources, and with a bank trade you spend 4 resources while gaining 1. So if you're throwing away 3 resources and it takes 1.5 orbit or 6 turns to produce these resources, this can set you way back. But let's imagine you use this bank trade to city up the 8-5-10 to increase your production to 32 pips. Now you produce more than 3.5 resources per orbit. So the loss of a 4-for-1 bank trade is less than an orbit's worth of production. In this case, a big city makes up for the loss from the bank trade, but you can see how close it still is. So let's move on to tactic number 3, resource imbalances. A typical 10-point plan to win Catan looks something like this or this or this. The common denominator is you need a lot of ore and wheat. So let's focus on this plan. 3 cities, the longest road and 2 settlements. This will cost 9 ore, 9 wheat, 3 sheep, 8 wood and 8 brick. You'll most definitely need more cards to account for losing cards to the robber, your competition for the longest road, and the need to do bank trades, so let's double it. To produce this amount of cards in 70 turns, you need around 9 production pips for ore, wheat, wood and brick from the start, which is impossible. However, after upgrading settlements to city, you have quite a lot more, so let's take a look. In this game, black pretty much accomplishes this feat on turn 43. 10 pips of ore, 12 pips of wheat, 10 pips of wood and 6 pips of brick, which is 38 pips total. And a wheat port to bank trade the additional wheat for the missing brick and sheep. Let's assume there's 27 turns left to play, and based on the EVC you will produce around 28 resources for the remainder of the game. In this case, black was able to set up their production in such a way that it matches a good 10-point plan. But that's not always the case, because strong opponents will make it very difficult for you to do so. So what do? Here's 4 ways to play around this. You've already seen the first. Especially 2-for-1 ports can make an imbalanced setup balanced. The second is to build into new resources with your third settlement. An expansion strategy if you will. If you don't produce ore but you produce the rest, build on the ore with your third settlement. But often that new spot alone isn't enough for your game plan. So you also want to trade with your opponents. Make sure to place your settlements on resources they actually want. If a player who has a lot of ore doesn't produce any wood, it could be a good option to trade for that in the early game. However, don't rely on trades too long because later in the game they don't happen as often. The fourth way to balance your resources revolves around extortion, which is the fourth tactic you should know. Extortion is a tactic that's a staple of the current Catan metagame. Trust me, you won't win a lot of games without it. Let's say I'm gonna do something you don't want, like steal a card from you or cut you off to a good spot. Unless you trade me a certain resource. In online play, this gets abbreviated to resource NB. In this sentence, NB stands for non-block, or I won't block you. So, or NB means if you trade me an ore on this turn, I won't block you with this robber I'm about to move. And the reason people accept these types of deals is because getting blocked on a good spot has an estimated value equal to 3 cards. So you can imagine that not getting blocked is quite advantageous. However, there's a few situations where it's best to not accept these deals. The first is that a player who is offering this deal is too far ahead, and getting a certain deal would make them unstoppable. Another would be if you expect they're bluffing. Strong players don't often block the player in last place, and rightfully so. However, they sometimes extort these players into trading them a resource they want. Sometimes they follow through, sometimes they don't. If you know they're bluffing, there's no need to take this type of deal. I recommend you to employ this tactic if you don't do it already. An exception is when you're not sure which resource you're looking for. Then you can ask something like NS for NS, which means non-steal for a non-steal. The person you don't steal from promises not to steal from you the next time either. Which brings us to tactic number 5. One of the most important concepts of Catan is space. It's often described as how many open settlement spots are around you that you can get to first. The main reason space is so essential is because you can get production pips for a better economy. But the second reason is a stronger road network. If you're playing a strategy that relies on taking the longest road, space is important, because you need a lot of production. And if the game goes on for a long time, you might need enough space to drop 15 consecutive roads. But even the largest army players need space, because they need to build 1 or 2 settlements, otherwise it's very tough to reach 10 victory points. Here are 2 tactics that can help you create space in unlikely ways. And let's start with the double road gambit. The double road gambit works as follows. You point your roads in a way that it threatens to cut off the same player twice. You expect them to be able to win one of the races, but the other race would then be a win for you. Most likely, your opponent can choose which race to win, but it's unlikely they win both. I only recommend this tactic when you can't find anything else, but it's an interesting thought to keep in mind. As in, when someone invests in this area, it will take a while before they can invest here too. And the same approach applies to the backplow gambit. The name of the backplow gambit is derived from the term plow, which is the popular expression for getting cut off in Catan nowadays. A backplow is a move where you build towards a spot you didn't didn't originally point your road towards. So the backplow gambit works as follows. If you get plowed to a certain spot, you have a backup option. You backplow from your settlement to take a great spot anyways. This again works best if you raise the same opponent twice, because if they spend in one area, they're less likely to stop you in another. Tactic number 6 revolves around the Monopoly. The Monopoly is by far the strongest development card in Catan. Let's take a look at the stats. Players who play 0 Monopolies win 20% of their games, while players who play one of them win 38% of their games. And if you think that's wild, players who play both Monopolies in a game win 52% of their games. 52, that's more than half. And it's why top players draw so many development cards. However, there's a trick that makes the Monopoly even more powerful. But there's a catch, because people will hate you after you do it. I'm talking about the dirty Monopoly. Here's how it works. Let's imagine a fun and light-hearted game with your friends. First, you draw the Monopoly. Next, you keep track of everyone's cards. And you then recognize your opponents hold a lot of a certain card. Let's say weed. You then trade your own weed away to your opponents for some of their cards. To make it truly diabolical, you graciously thank them for the great deal and toast on your friendship. Then you reveal your development card and you show the Monopoly. Slowly, your acquaintances realize what you did. You take their weed and you have to find new friends. But after this move, you truly have to understand the final tactic. Because tactic number 7 is future deals. The people who want to play with you at this point are probably quite good themselves. So it's key to know some advanced tactics. Let's talk about future deals. In Catan, it's often the case a trade needs to feel right for both parties. And sometimes it just doesn't. A 1-for-1 is too advantageous for player A, while giving 2 cards is too good for player B. But you still gotta make deals to advance your game if you want to be the best of the best. That's why top level Catan games feature a lot of future deals. And here's a practical example. Let's say you're looking for ore. One of your opponents holds ore and is willing to trade it for a brick. Great, that's an opportunity. The only issue is you don't hold brick. For most players, the offer ends here. However, you and me, we continue. We could offer something along the lines of, if you trade me this ore now for a sheep, then I'll trade you my next brick. Then you could say something like, I produce a lot of brick, so that will likely be quite fast. You could combine the future deal tactic with the extortion tactic. You could offer a future non-steal with it, for example, or even a future non-block if you think it merits the situation. Now, these deals rely on trust, as people might not follow through. It helps to be in a setting where you might face these people again, because the consequences are greater. However, knowing when to apply each tactic is crucial, and to truly understand that, you have to know Catan's strategy. Fortunately, I made a video covering the 6 most popular Catan strategies you need to know, which you can find here. Regardless, thank you for watching and have a great day.